amazing how good these little. That's just a regular. Is that a?
Yeah. Hi everybody, I'm Josh Bergstrom with Bergstrom Wines, and I'm standing in the Shea Vineyard with Dick Shea, owner of Shea Vineyards and Shea Wine Cellars. And we're going to talk a little bit about this great vineyard in the Yamhill Carlton district. So, Dick, maybe you could tell us how did you get started with Shea?
Well, I think I worked back east and got had a glass of Oregon Pinot back in New York, and next thing I knew, a few weeks later, I was in a plane out here, and way back then, the Dundee Hills is where everything was planted. We're talking the late '80s, and the Dundee Hills are just about 2 miles off in that direction. But after doing some research, I got intrigued by this area over here where no one was planting. Totally different soil type. It's marine sediment. It's very shallow and very austere for the plants, and did enough research to get intrigued by it. Michael Etzel had just in the spring of '88 planted right over this ridge right here. We found this a couple of months later. Weren't really referencing him. He was sort of unknown, but he was the first guy to take a shot on these soil types that people were avoiding because the Dundee Hills worked well, and there was still land there. But we bought into this concept and planted, and within a few years, people started to really take notice, and now we're surrounded by other vineyards on this marine sediment in the Yamhill Carlton AVA and the Ribbon Ridge AVA, which have the same types of soil.
And what year did you plant the Shea Vineyard originally?
We started in '89, so
89.
1 year later. And it's, when we talk about the austere soils, it's when you put plants in an environment like that, it sends a signal to them. It seems that they have to work faster, and it's going to be a shorter season. And in this area where the whole race is to come in before the autumn rains, that's a very good thing because it means we get the fruit deeply ripe, or we get into the ripeness spectrum in a year when other people don't at all, or other more happy environments for the plants.
That's a great point, because for me, I think Shea is one of those warm sites in a cool climate, which for me is a formula for success.
Exactly.
And you talked about the soils here. These are old oceanic seabeds, so very sandy. And we're standing right now in the oak block. This portion of the fruit comes to Bergstrom Winery. It's one of the 5 blocks of Shea Vineyard that we're fortunate enough to work with. We have, from the bottom of the hill here to the top, 5 different clonal blocks, both the Dijon clones as well as Pommard and Wädenswil. This right here, where you built your winery next to the oak block, I remember when you guys excavated, the soil was only inches deep before you hit that
Right.
fractured sandstone.
Exactly, and and yet we don't irrigate these plants. The fractured sandstone, we've dug into it a few times, and you pick up the subsoil, and it looks like you're picking up a rock, and you squeeze it a little bit, and it just totally crumbles in your hand. And the plants go down into the roots go way deep, and we don't need to irrigate. We get the full benefit or negatives of whatever that vintage is giving us weather-wise, and each vintage really has its own character.
Yeah. So I mean, speaking of character, what are your favorites when you smell a Shea Pinot Noir? I mean, to me, it's got this. When they're young, when we were tasting the 09s together the other day, there's kind of a smoky, meaty thing, and the spice is really great. The spice character here, and the fruit spectrum seems to be in the darker cherry, but I know you can find some blueberry aromas as well out here.
Well, yeah, just as one note that I think is really distinctive about us or this area is there's also floral notes, which is mixed in with all the other things you've talked about, and violets are often mentioned, and I think that's a wonderful. It's just this array of complex flavors. But we are known, and again, this area is known for dark fruits. It's about a 14 days of ripening. I know, as you viticulture professor once explained to me, and you go through, and anything in there is legitimate, but you're more red fruited. As you get more deeply ripe, you get into the darker fruited. I talked about how we get the fruit pretty deeply ripe here. So often often the wines that come from Shea fruit are into the blue-black range, and there can be some red notes in there, but as a descriptor to put what is the real character of it, you think of blue-black with Shea.
Yeah. Well, I love the Shea Vineyard. Really sticks out to me as making wines that for Oregon I think are really opulent, big, round, but very balanced. And I think that Shea has a wonderful structural integrity to it. Definitely fine, ripe tannins, and with that darker fruit character, kind of one of the more hedonistic offerings from Oregon, I think.
Well, thank you. But one thing I point out is the balance. I think balance comes from winemaking, and we like to think we work with some of the best winemakers in Oregon, and that's who I'm standing with, is one of the best of the best. And a balanced wine takes a really deft touch by the winemaker.
Well, and we believed and still believe very strongly in this vineyard, and it's great that we have the opportunity to work with multiple clonal blocks here, because that allows us to achieve balance, much like you do in Shea wine cellars, being able to mix the Pinot with the Wädenswil with maybe some 777, some 115. I think a true vineyard expression, which is fun.
Well, you raise a good point. Even though the first impression might be a single vineyard release is just about what that vineyard does, and occasionally someone will come out with a single block release from Shea that is a little bit of just what that block wants to do. There's still a lot of judgment calls that has to be made by the winemaker. But when you get to really multiple clones, multiple aspects, different slopes on this vineyard, different elevations up or down the hill, different age vines, then the winemaker has got even more of a chance to shine and put it in one direction or another. And it really becomes this combination of their fruit and winemaking talent.
Well, great. Well, thanks for your time, Dick. And thanks for
you,
great
Josh.
farming.
Yeah.
Cheers, everybody.